Yes, friends, welcome to Galaxy Online Learning. I'm Sunil Desai. So, Galaxy Online Learning is a division of Galaxy Tutorials, and today we are going to study the fifth chapter of your supplementary textbook. I'm talking about 10th CBSE, okay? 10th CBSE English, fifth chapter of your supplementary textbook, Footprints Without Fate. Okay, the chapter's name is also the same, Footprints Without Fate. Okay, see, this is about a scientist who discovers who discovers how to make himself invisible. Okay, can anyone become invisible? So he discovers a way to become invisible. Okay, but this scientist, whether he uses this for good or for he misuses this discovery of his, that's what we are going to study in this chapter. Okay, see, the two boys started in surprise at the fresh muddy imprints of a pair of bare feet. What was a barefooted man doing on the steps of a house in this middle of London, and where was the man? As they gazed, a remarkable sight met their eyes. A fresh footmark appeared from nowhere. Further footprints followed one after another, descending the steps and progressing down the street. The boys followed, fascinated, until the muddy impressions became fainter and fainter and at last disappeared altogether. See what happens one fine day. Two, two boys, what they saw that they are in London city, and all of a sudden what they find is that there are imprints of some muddy feet on the staircase of a house. Okay, the steps of a house, they see muddy footprints. Okay, muddy footprints, and they are just wondering why, how come muddy footprints on the steps of a house in the middle of London, and they were fascinated. Further, they were fascinated to see that there were new footprints coming on the steps, and they were as they were descending, and the footprints were descending, moving downwards towards the street from the house, and they started following those footsteps. There was none to see, only the footprints. They could see only the footprints. There was no man, only the footprints, and they were just fascinated. They followed those footprints, and they started following, and suddenly what happened? They become fainter and fainter, and slowly they disappeared. Okay, now this was really a mystery, something miracle. Okay, only you are seeing the footprints, you are not seeing the person, nothing. Okay, so the explanation is being given. The explanation of the mystery was really simple enough. The bewildered boys had been following a scientist who had just discovered how to make the human body transparent. The explanation for this mystery was very, very simple. That these two boys were following a scientist, okay, who had just discovered, they were following a scientist who had just discovered that human body can be made transparent, invisible, means transparent like a glass, invisible. So you can't see him, it's transparent. So you could just see through that body, human body. Okay? So Griffin, the scientist, had carried out experiment after experiment to prove that the human body could become invisible. Finally, he swallowed certain rare drugs and his body became as transparent as a sheet of glass, though it also remained as solid as glass. So, who they were following? They were following that scientist, Griffin, okay, who had done a lot of experiments to find a solution how he can make a human body invisible. Okay, so he was working on it for days together, for years together, and finally he swallowed certain rare drugs, and that made him transparent as a glass. The human body became as transparent as a glass, but it was as solid as a glass too. You could not see it, but you could feel it. Means you could wear something on it. The body was solid, but like a glass, but the body was solid, but it was transparent. So no one could see that body. Brilliant scientist though he was, Griffin was rather a lawless person. His landlord disliked him and tried to eject him. In revenge, Griffin set fire to the house, and to get away without being seen, he had to remove his clothes. Thus, it was that he became a homeless wanderer, without clothes, without money, and quite invisible, until he happened to step in some mud and left footprints as he walked. Okay, so Griffin was a really brilliant scientist to discover something like this. Was really made a lot of brilliance. It needed brilliance. Okay, he was a brilliant scientist, but he was a lawless person. Okay, he didn't follow the rules, the laws of the government of the country. Okay, his landlord didn't like him, and he wanted to remove Griffin from his home. Okay, so Griffin had got angry, and Griffin, what he did was that he set fire to the house where he was staying. He set fire to the house, and to and to not being seen by anyone, that he had set fire to the house, so he didn't want anyone to see him. So what he did was that he had started the drug now, so he had become invisible. He removed all his clothes, otherwise the clothes could be visible. Na? So he removed all his clothes. He now was without money, without clothes. He was just wandering around until he stepped in some mud. And because he stepped in some mud, his foot were showing prints of muddy prints on the pavement. Okay, on the steps. Okay, so he had left the footprints. He escaped easily enough from the boys who followed his footprints in London, but his adventures were by no means over. He had chosen a bad time of the year to wander about London without clothes. It was midwinter. The air was bitterly cold, and he could not do without clothes. Instead of walking about the streets, he decided to slip into a big London store for warmth. So, he easily escaped from those two boys because that mud slowly disappeared from his feet. So they could not find him. But his adventures of the scientist Griffin were not over. Now he had chosen a wrong time to move around without clothes because it was a time of winter, midwinter, and it was very chill over there in London at that time, very cold. So now he was feeling very shivery and he needed some warmth. He can't go around naked because he was feeling very cold. Though he was not been seen by anyone, no one was seeing him naked, but he himself could not bear that cold London winter. Okay? So, to get some warmth, he slips into a London store, a big store in London. Now that he is invisible, no one notices him entering. Okay? So, closing time had arrived. Now, it was the store was about to close. And as soon as the door shut, Griffin was able to give himself the pleasure of clothing and filling himself with it without regard to expenses. He broke open boxes and wrappers and fitted himself out with warm clothes. Soon, with shoes, an overcoat, and a wide-brimmed hat, he became a fully dressed and visible person. In the kitchen of the restaurant, he found cold meat and coffee, and he followed up the meal with sweets and wine taken from the grocery store. Finally, he settled down to sleep on a pile of quilts. So now he is in a big London store, in a big mall he is now. So the mall is shut down. Now there is no one inside the store. So what he does now is that he removes the wrappers, boxes, opens up the boxes, wrappers and starts wearing clothes. He enjoys himself wearing clothes, coat, hat, everything he wears. Now it's quite visible. Now he's hungry too. He doesn't have to pay for anything now because he's invisible, right? So he's hungry too. So he goes to the kitchen of the restaurant and as there is some meat over there, okay, cold meat. So he prepares meat, he has coffee. After that, he has sweets. Okay, so he enjoys himself, he has sweets, he has wine, he enjoys himself, and then he slips on the pile of quilts over there. kept for selling. So he is enjoying himself whole night. Okay. If only Griffin had managed to wake up in good time, all might have been well. As it was, he did not wake up until the assistants were already arriving next morning. When he saw a couple of them approaching, he panicked and began to run. They naturally gave chase. In the end, he was able to escape only by quickly taking off his newly found clothes. So once more, he found himself invisible but naked in the chill January air. Now, he would have enjoyed all this life, but what happened was that he slept that day and he had eaten at night and he had slept for quite a long time. He didn't get up before the shop was opened the next morning. Next morning, what happened? The assistants who came, they opened the shop. Okay, and when he saw that the shop is open, and when he got up, he saw the assistant approaching him, and he got panicked. Nothing came to him. He started running away from the. He just got up. He saw the assistant approaching, and he got panicked and began to run. So naturally, when the assistant saw someone running, okay, now he was very close, so he was visible. Except his face, everything was visible. So they, since he started running, the assistant, they started chasing him. And at that time when they were chasing, suddenly an idea came to his mind that I can stop this chase when I will remove my clothes. So the scientist Griffin starts removing clothes one by one. And he starts removing clothes, and once he removes all his clothes, he becomes once again invisible, and the assistants are unable to catch him. Okay, but what happens is that again he has become naked in this bitter cold of January. Okay, this time he decided to try the stock of a theatrical company in the hope of finding not only clothes but also something that would hide the empty space above his shoulders. Shivering with cold, he hurried to Drury Lane, the center of the theatre world. Now he thinks that he should wear something such that, see, now about the collar he is invisible because his face is not been seen, because the whole thing becomes invisible. The part of his body below his neck, which he is wearing clothes, shirt, trousers, etc., that's why he is visible. Okay, above is not visible. So he says now, he thinks aloud and he finds an answer for it. He says, I'll go to the theatrical company. Okay, in the theatre they have so many wardrobes, different types of things. Okay, so I'll get something from there so that I can put it on my face and so I can be visible. Okay, and he can wear that clothes. So he goes to Drury Lane, the center of the theatre world. He soon found a suitable shop. He immediately finds a shop. He made his way. Since now he's invisible, he's naked, so he's invisible. So he enters inside the shop, goes upstairs, and after a little later, he comes out wearing bandages around his forehead. So he has a bandage around his forehead. So now that part is seen. He is wearing dark glasses. So that part again is seen. He is wearing a false nose, and he has big bushy whiskers. All these things you need in a theatre to play different characters. So he gets all these things in that theatre shop, in that shop. So what he does is that now he wears a large head. So now his face is also visible. So now he can wear clothes, he can wear everything he has worn. And now that to avoid being seen by the shopkeeper, what he does is that he attacks the shopkeeper from behind. Okay, and after which he robs him all the money he could find in the shop and lets away. Eager to get away from the crowded London, he took a train to the village of Iping, where he booked 2 rooms at a local inn. So now it is very difficult to stay in London. Okay, so what he thinks is that let's go to the countryside and stay over there. Okay, so he goes to the village of Iping and there he books 2 rooms at the local inn. The arrival of a stranger of such in winter was in any case an unusual event. A stranger of such uncommon appearance set all tongues wagging. Mrs. Hall, the landlord's wife, made every effort to be friendly, but Griffin had no desire to talk about and told her, "My reason for coming to Iping is a desire for solitude. I did not wish to be disturbed in my work. Besides, an accident has affected my face." So he comes to Iping, books two rooms in an inn. But people, it's a small village, Iping, and people in that village, okay, that's an unusual event. Someone coming and staying in an inn because it's a winter time, and in winter time no one goes around. No one goes to watch any places in those times. Okay, mostly everyone tries to stay indoors during winter because very very chill, cold. Okay, outside there. So people just they find it very strange. It's a small village, you know. The tongues start wagging. Then they start talking about how, and his appearance was also looked. He had bandage on his face and everything. So he looked quite a different person. And their tongue starts wagging. Means they start talking a lot, many different things about that stranger. Mrs. Hall, who is the owner's wife, the owner of the inn's wife, tries to become friendly. Okay, because she wants to know more about him. So she tries to become, because how a stranger like him has come and stayed in this time of the year. So she tries to become friendly. But Griffin doesn't want to talk with her. So he tells her that my reason for coming to Iping in this village is I want peace, I want solitude, I don't want to be friends with anyone. I have some work, and for that I have come over here and I need solitude, means I want to remain alone. Okay, so I don't want to be disturbed in my work. And an accident has affected his face. Satisfied that a guest was an eccentric scientist, and in view of the fact that he had paid her in advance, Mrs. Hall was prepared to excuse his strange habits and irritable temper. But the stolen money did not last long, and presently Giffin had to admit that he had no more ready cash. He pretended, however, that he was expecting a check to arrive at any moment. See, now this lady, Mrs. Hall, gets satisfied with his answers because she feels that he must be some eccentric scientist who wants solitude. And that second thing was that he had paid already in advance, so she had nothing to do about it. She had got the money, let him stay for how many days he wants. As long as he is giving money, she has no problem with it. Okay, so and she had received everything in advance. So she was prepared to excuse his strange habits and his eccentric behavior. Okay, but the stolen money which Griffin had stolen from the theatre shop, didn't last long, and he got over with the money. Now what to do? How to pay? So he tells Miss Hall that he is expecting some check very soon, payment very soon. Shortly afterwards, a curious episode occurred. Very early in the morning, a clergyman and his wife were awakened by noises in the study. Creeping downstairs, they heard the chink of money being taken from the clergyman's desk. Without making any noise, and with a poker grasped firmly in his hand, the clergyman flung open the door and shouted, "Surrender!" Then, to his amazement, he realized that the room appeared to be empty. He and his wife looked under the desk and behind the curtains, and even up in the chimney. There wasn't a sign of anybody. Yet, the desk had been opened and the housekeeping money was missing. Extraordinary affair, the clergyman kept saying for the rest of the day. Okay, but in that small village, some unusual thing happened. Okay, now some shortly after, within a day or two, an unusual thing happened. What happened was that there was a clergyman who was staying in that village along with his wife. And suddenly, very early in the morning one day, the clergyman hears that someone has entered his house. He hears this noise of money. His money, someone has been at the clergyman's desk, and they heard the voice of coins. Okay, someone is counting them and someone is collecting them. So the clergyman creeps down from his bedroom. He comes out, comes near the desk and his room where he has kept the money. Okay, and he suddenly opens the door and shouts surrender with a poker in his hand. There's a poker in his hand and he shouts surrender. But to his amazement, what he says is that there's no one in the room. He looks behind the curtains, he looks below the desk, everywhere he sees in the whole room. The voice was coming from this room only. The sound of the money being collected, everything he was, but there was no one in that room, but the desk was open and the cash was stolen from his study. Okay, from the desk, the cash was stolen, but there was no one to be seen. Even he looked up in the chimney, but there was no one. Okay, so the clergyman was surprised. How could it happen? There's no one in the room, but the desk is open, there's money. Okay, so he whole day thinking, how is this extraordinary thing happening in my house? But it was no extraordinary as the behavior of Mrs. Hall's furniture. But it was not as extraordinary as the behavior of Mrs. Hall's furniture little later that morning. But the narrator says that it wasn't extraordinary, that much extraordinary as something what happened in with Mrs. Hall's furniture later in that morning. Okay. Though it was something extraordinary, something bigger than that, something greater extraordinary happened with Mrs. Hall's furniture. Now let's see what happened with Mrs. Hall's furniture. The landlord and his wife were up very early and were surprised to see the scientist's door wide open. Usually it was shut and locked, and he was curious if anyone entered his room. The opportunity seemed too good to be missed. They peeped round the door, saw nobody, and decided to investigate. The bedclothes were cold, showing that the scientist must have been up for some time. And the stranger still, the clothes and bandages that he always wore were lying about the room. See, the landlord and his wife had woken up early that morning, and they were really surprised to see that the scientist's door, in which the scientist was staying, the two rooms, okay, the door was open. And they were very surprised to see the door open, because the scientist never kept the door open, and you will never like someone coming up in his room. So they were really surprised. So they thought now it is a very good opportunity to see what actually is in that room. So what actually the scientist is doing. First time they were seeing that the door is open. So they try to peep. So they are peeping in that room and they find that there is no one. So they enter the room. They say now this is the right time to investigate, to check up with the scientist. So they enter. So when they touch the bed, they find it's very cold. That it's very cold. That means the scientists have left the room quite early. That's why it's cold. If you would have been in the room and you have been sleeping in the bed, it would have been warm. Now it's cold. That means he has been out of the room for quite a long time. Okay. And most strange thing what they saw was that the bandages, the clothes, all were lying on the floor. There only. Okay, usually he wears the bandage, everything was there on the floor. But the scientist was not to be seen. All of a sudden, Mrs. Hall heard a sneeze close to her ear. A moment later, The head on the bedpost leapt up and dashed itself into her face. Then the bedroom chair became alive. Springing into air, it charged straight at her, legs foremost. As she and her husband turned away in terror, the extraordinary chair pushed them both out of the room and then appeared to slam and lock the door after them. But as they were checking his room, suddenly Mrs. Hall hears what? That there is some sniff near her nose, near her ears. Okay. A moment later, immediately at the moment, the hat which was kept on the bedpost, suddenly it rises up and it dashed into the face of Mrs. Hall. Next moment, what happens is that the bedroom chair which was in the bedroom, it suddenly has been lifted. It suddenly jumps up, okay, with his legs towards Mrs. Hall and her husband, and it is just throwing them out of the room. So they suddenly get surprised and they get there's fear struck on them, because how is it suddenly a chair gets up, okay, and moves around all alone on its own, okay? So they are pushed out of the room, and then the room is been slammed down, closed, okay? The door is slammed and everything is closed again. So they are really worried. How can this thing happen? All of a sudden, how can the chair is rising up and it's pushing them out of the room, the door slamming, no one to be seen, nothing to be seen. Okay? Mrs. Hall almost fell down the stairs in hysterics. She was mad, she was in hysteria. Okay, how could this thing happen? Okay, and she was about to fall down the stairs. She was convinced that the room was haunted by spirits, and that the stranger had somehow caused this to enter into her furniture. She is now sure that some spirit has entered the room, and the stranger, who is a scientist, has made the spirit to enter into the furniture, and that's why the furniture was moving all of its own. So she feels now that the room is now being haunted by some spirit. My poor mother used to sit in that chair, she moaned. To think it should rise up against me now. She thinks, this chair. Now my poor mother used to sit all the time on this chair, and now that same chair has been rising and throwing me away. How could that happen? That means some spirits have really entered that chair. The feeling among the neighbors was that trouble was caused by witchcraft. But witchcraft or not, when news of the burglary at the clergyman home became known, the strange scientist was strongly suspected of having had a hand in it. Suspicion grew even stronger when he suddenly produced some ready cash, though he had admitted not long before that he had no money. Okay. Now, the feeling among the neighbors was that there was some witchcraft. Okay, there was some ghost in that room moving around. And when the news of the burglary which took place at the clergyman's place came to be known to the whole village, they and something witchcraft like thing, something ghost or something spirits moving in the room of the scientist, that made it sure that the people thought that somewhere the scientist has been connected to the burglary and this thing happening in the inn, and which supported their thinking was that the scientist immediately had paid some cash. He didn't have any cash, but now he had paid cash to the inn owner. The village constable was secretly sent for. So the village constable, the police in the village, the police constable of the village was sent for to check it. So instead of waiting for the constable, Mrs. Hall went to the scientist, who had somehow mysteriously appeared from his empty bedroom. Now Mrs. Hall had said there was no one in the empty room, and now There was no one, and the chair had pushed them out of the room, and the door was slammed. And now, all of a sudden, how the scientist has come out from the same room where there was no one and paid her the cash. So Mrs. Hall thinks that there is something suspicious. So she, before the constable comes, she goes into the room and she asks, "I want to know what you have been doing to my chair upstairs," she demanded. "And I want to know how it is you came out of an empty room and how you entered a locked room." She says, "I want to know what you did to my chair. How the chair suddenly started moving. Okay, suddenly started moving, and I want to know one more thing. The room was empty. Then from where did you enter this empty room? This was a locked room, this was an empty room, and how come you came out of this empty room? Because I had checked it, there was no one in the room." The scientist was a very quick-tempered, means he got angry, he was very high-tempered, the scientist said. So, the scientist was, and he now became furious. And he says, "You don't know who I am." And, "Very well, I'll show you." He gets furious. And he says, "I'll show you who I am." And suddenly, he starts throwing off the bandages which he had used on his face. Okay, he suddenly started throwing his bandages, his whiskers, his spectacles, and even his nose he throws off. It took him only a minute to do this. The horrified people in the bar found themselves staring at the headless man, and when he threw everything, what happened was that there was nothing could be seen above his shoulders. So the first time, all the people who were there in the bar of the inn, they were surprised. They were staring at some headless man. A man was standing with the clothes, but there was no head to be seen. Mr. Jeffers, the constable, now arrived. Okay, by that time, Jeffers, the constable in that village, he arrives and was quite surprised to find that he had to arrest a man without a head. And he was quite surprised that now he had to arrest someone who doesn't have a head. Okay, he has the below the neck, everything is there, but above the neck there is nothing. So first time he was seeing something, and that he had to arrest him. But Jeffers was not easily prevented from doing his duty. If a magistrate's warrant ordered a person arrest, then that person had to be arrested with or without his head. But Jeffers had to do his duty. He had to do his work. Since the court had given him the order, the magistrate had given him to arrest that person. So whether the person has head or not was another matter. It was nothing to do with the arrest. So he tries to arrest him. Now, there followed a remarkable scene as the policeman tried to get hold of the man who was becoming more and more invisible as he threw off one garment after another. Finally, a shirt flew into the air, and the constable found himself struggling with someone he could not see at all. Some people tried to help him, but found themselves hit by blows that seemed to come from nowhere. Okay, now a remarkable scene was to be seen by people. As a policeman, Mr. Jeffers tried to arrest that person. What happens is that the person is becoming more and more invisible. As the clothes, he was throwing out the clothes, he was becoming more and more invisible. And the last thing, when he threw his shirt, finally he threw his shirt into the air, and now it was really difficult for Jeffers, the policeman, to arrest him. The people around started to help. He was struggling. How? Because he was not seeing anyone. Then whom to arrest and how to arrest? So the people around him, they tried to help him out, but of no use, because suddenly they were hit by blows and didn't know from where the blows were coming, because they were not able to see anything, but their face were hit by blows. Okay, that means the scientist Griffin was hitting them by blows, but since he was invisible, no one was able to notice him. In the end, Jeffers was knocked unconscious as he made a last attempt to hold onto the unseen scientist. At the end, what happened was that Jeffers was made unconscious. Means what was the scientist Griffin doing? Griffin was giving him blows, but now he was not able to see. So he gave him so many blows that he got unconscious. Who? Jeffers, as he tried to catch him because he could not see anything, but the blows were coming from nowhere and hitting him, and he lay unconscious on the floor. There were nervous, excited cries of hold him, but this was easier said than done. There were people shouting around, saying, hold him, catch him, catch him. But that was not possible. It was easier said than done. To say to catch him was easy, but to catch him was difficult because no one was able to see him. Griffin had shaken himself free. Now Griffin had made himself free because now there was very nothing, so no one could see him. So now he could move away around, and no one knew where to lay hands on him. And so now no one was able to lay hands on him because he was again free now, without any clothes, without any wearing anything. Now he could move around because he was invisible. Okay, so that's a very funny story by H.G. Wells. Okay, so I hope you have enjoyed this story. And once again, before concluding, I would like to remember you to subscribe to the channel Galaxy Online Learning, and don't forget to press the bell icon so that you get notifications of all the new videos. Once they are uploaded, you will get a notification of it so that you can watch the videos and study sitting at home. Okay, thank you.